So today I want to talk a little bit about feminism and how destructive this ideology really is in modern society. And I've always been opposed to feminism, and I've recently woken up to the idea of how destructive it really is. Destructive on the youth, destructive on traditional values, destructive on virtues of the West, Western virtues, Western values. And I have prepared quite a lot of notes, so I hope I can get through all of this without it being a ridiculously long video. But I guess I'll give you a little bit of a backstory on how I came to the realizations that I did. I've always been opposed to feminism in some sort of way, shape, or form. For a while, when growing up at least, I was definitely told by elders and people who had superiority over me, such as like teachers and stuff. So basically in school, we were kind of taught that a bit of gynocentrism, I would say, sort of taught that, yeah, women are superior and men are inferior. I don't know where this narrative really started. I would say probably, I realized it in my childhood, but I think it did start in the 60s or 70s, I would say, along that lines, when the sort of era of, I guess the sexual revolution, as they call it, started. But yeah, I always sort of felt that there's that didn't make sense to me, because we were sort of taught, like, women, they're being taken advantage of by men in some sort of way, shape, or form, and I never really saw that. I said, well, I got a lot of friends who were boys, and I said, when I was younger, at least, I was like, well, I don't they're nice to me, I don't get it, like a child. That's a very much a child response, like, they're nice to me, I don't know why would I, very innocent at heart. That's what children are, very innocent. So I never really understood this narrative. And then when I got in high school, the idea of feminism and the notion of feminism got more vitriolic. I sort of felt sympathetic towards my peers who believed in the ideology and preached it up on the mountaintop, so to speak. I was like, well, I sort of feel bad for them, and I sort of felt like maybe I should just be their friends, and I didn't really see how destructive it was and how destructive cultural Marxism was until fairly recently. And I'm gonna say around about a few weeks ago, I woke up to the idea of what's wrong with modern society. But I sort of felt bad for these women, and I didn't know why. I just was like, there was something in me that said, oh, poor, like, these girls. I just was like, yeah, I just felt like they didn't have the right direction or weren't being shown the right direction by their elders, which is that's sort of the lack of traditionalism definitely led to the large nuance, or the large, I guess, explosion of the ideas of feminism. And I don't know. So when I was younger, and then when I got in high school, it got a lot more vitriolic, and girls would have clubs and they would talk about it, and the teachers, because I went to a very liberal high school, but teachers would they'd have presentations about how men were bad, and there was even a presentation where they were telling men that masculinity was innately evil, and I was just like, I feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone. I don't know what about this, it just doesn't feel right. And I didn't know at that point in time all of the facts, because we were also being fed different, like, ideas. It was like, it sort of reminds me of Pink Floyd's Brick in the Wall. It's just conform, don't question, just conform. And that is modern society these days. A lot of conformity, not a lot of reason, and that's, I don't know, but I always really felt like at heart I was a traditional woman and somebody with traditional values. And I did try to question these girls, and
many of my peers, and I said, you know, I tried to have debates with them, but what they did is they innately just recoiled at any sort of idea of me debating them and just used the first emotional response they could. And some would almost break out into tears. I kid you not, because these people aren't very grounded in reality. They're very much more emotional people. So I felt that that was wrong. And then I had been taking a class this year, and there was a woman who, like, the first class, I remember it was the day after the election, and they started this thing called the Women's March. And at the time I didn't know anything about it, and then I was told by many people that it was a feminist movement, and a woman in my class she was around the age of 50. This was an adult class, so I was the youngest. But this woman was like telling me something about this is also a common sentiment used by the left, that any self-respecting human being or any compassionate human being would be into the Women's March because, you know, feminism or something. And I was just like, why? I mean, it's to me. And I said, it just looks like a lot of women complaining and yelling for no reason. That's not a very good way to get your point across. And I said that, and she's just like, how dare you? She's like, you should be going to blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, they're talking about, like, the way they call themselves nasty women or something, or they were calling themselves nasty women, and I was just like, I don't care. Like, it makes me sort of recoil at the fact of, or not even think about what they're saying, because the way they present it is just not a very good idea to begin with. I mean, if you want to present your topic, I don't think shock value is really the best idea. I mean, of course it's marketable, and you can see that's how feminism's kind of gone, as this very shocking, bra-burning narrative of ideology, narrative of thought, but it was crazy. So I sort of was just like, why? I asked her at one point, and this has also been my response for when I ask people things who are on the left, and if they don't have facts, they use feelings. But I asked her, I said, why would any self-respecting human being go to a march like that? I just asked it. I wasn't attacking her. I was like, well, why do you think that? I'm curious. I want to hear your perspective. She just said, I can't believe you even asked me such a thing. You know, can't you see women are suffering? I'm like, I'm a woman. I don't feel very much suffering. But, you know, you see her, she was just, her ideas were completely different to mine. And so I just felt like I don't understand this whole idea that victimization is power, because it's not. You know, thoughts are power, but I don't understand. Facts are power. That's a powerful thing. Facts are power, and it's good, in my opinion, to sort of express facts with a little bit of grace and a little bit of elegance, and just a little bit of simple manners. You don't have to be yelling at me when you're telling me this. I mean, like I said, isn't this an ideology that's supposed to be friendly towards women? No, only women who think a certain way, right? Alright, so I'm gonna get into some very specific points. So my first problem with this ideology is that you can see in popular culture and in the media today and many other forums is that this sort of narrative is being served up that bad behavior is encouraged in the name of so-called liberation. And what I want to say is that, you see, for example, we can take the idea of body positivity. And it says to women, you know, don't work out. Go ahead, eat that, you know, very unhealthy food, and it's okay to be fat, and it's not on a health standpoint. We're not even talking about aesthetics here, but on a health, facts of health suggest, but the fact is that being obese is not healthy. You know, you're prone to heart problems and a whole bunch of host of problems, lower immune system. And it's sort of like this idea of, go ahead, be fat. It's, you know, in the name of liberation, you can go ahead and have this sort of behavior. And and the idea is that, oh no, a woman, all body types are beautiful, except that really, really healthy, thin one, and that's a problem I've been having for a while, because I do notice that a lot of people will tell you if you're thin and they're not, oh, how did you get that? They'll just like to put you down, and it's innately dysfunctional. It's sort of like, well, if they put you down, they feel better about themselves. It's a form of denial. But that's just one example. We could also go on and we could say that feminism pushes women to be more promiscuous in the name of liberation. It pushes the notion that women should behave poorly in public. And you see these feminists at rallies and such yelling and screaming and all this stuff, and it you know, women are getting drunk and all that stuff, and they're acting rowdy, and that's all bad behavior, really. It's not self-respecting at all. And that's my first point. The second point is definitely with the left in general. They have this notion that feelings are facts, and they aren't. Facts aren't feelings, and feelings aren't facts. You can't really front an ideology by saying, oh yeah, you know, that's wrong because it's mean. It's like, well, a lot of times the truth hurts, but, you know, what is it that I've been reading Nietzsche a lot recently, and he says something like, hope in reality is the worst of all evils because it prolongs the sufferings of man. So basically by providing somebody with hope, they're going to start to believe something that isn't true, and they're going to suffer because they're believing something that isn't true, and they're living their life based on that belief, and that's just going to prolong their torments and their suffering. And it's better to just rip off that band-aid or bite the bullet, so to speak, and tell somebody, hey, that's not true, or live, you know, just live a life of truth and be honest. But, you know, that's definitely not the narrative of feminism at all. You know, this whole narrative that, like, feelings, hope, you know, blah, blah, I don't know, I could get on a whole philosophical discussion about that. But yeah, and the next problem I sort of have with it is this blatant, disgusting notion that, you know, that it just feeds off of the weak. It does. And so this blatant, disgusting notion that women are innately victimized, or women are innately victims, and that sort of is not true. I mean, in the first world, I don't understand what we don't have, but that's just, you know, amusing facts. But it is a cult-like ideology, and it feeds off of young, feeble minds, young, developing minds, and kids, too. I was at a function about a year ago, and there was this barbecue, and this one woman, she has two little boys. I don't think they're even over the age of 10 yet. But one of the boys said something mean to the girl, and then the girl said something mean to the boy. Some sort of like kid-like qualm or fight. You know, every kid does it. It's basically natural. So the boy went up to the mother and said, so-and-so said something bad to me. And instead of being like, you know, well, what did you say first? Or why did that happen, you think? He's just like, the mother told her son, basically said, you know girls are better than you. You know girls are better than boys. And I just was like, I'm sorry, what? Like, I reacted and I said, okay, so this idea of gynocentrism, yeah, that's really healthy to your kid. He's gonna grow up to have a overbearing wife, probably, because of what you've done. And you see what you're doing. You're victimizing your kid because you think that girls are better. Okay, I wonder how you found a husband. I was kind of shocked because she is married, so anyways, who am I to judge? But that was something that really shocked me. And under the idea of this bad behavior this bad behavior that many feminists or the ideology of feminism pushes to young people, feminism basically encourages women to be more promiscuous, and it does devalue traditional relationships. I don't know how many times, 9 out of 10, they'll put down traditional people or traditional women who want to be wives, or who are wives, or have kids, or have this traditional nuclear family, which is how, for society's, generations, that's how the world has been until, I don't know, I guess I would say the sexual revolution. That is what pushed society to improve, because we had tradition, and it works, and it very much suited the natural biological and psychological needs of men and women. And it's just weird that it would an ideology that would be positive towards women would just put them down. It's something that I do not understand. That, oh, okay, so you're supposed to be accepting of all women, but I guess you're not, because traditional women don't really fit the narrative of the quote oppressed loudmouth bitches. But that's just what I'll say about that. Another very strange point is that feminism encourages women to be victims, yet in the same note tells them that they are strong. So you can see this sort of ideology, this sort of strange narrative that, you're victims, but wait, women are so strong, man. They're so strong, yet they're still victims. I mean, my whole idea is that it just uses that as control. So if you tell a group that they're innately weak, or, that they're victims, then they're going to be more susceptible to your control, because they believe that they're victims. Another thing is that I don't know how many times you'll see women who are like in the public spectrum, or not the public spectrum, but are in the public sphere. And I don't know how many times you'll see it, but there'll be comedians and whatever types that will be like, they'll say, oh, men are really putting us down, blah, blah, blah. Or a lot of times I think it's just because they want something. They want something they don't want to work for. And I saw this interview the other day where Bill Burr was talking to this really whiny woman who was a feminist, and she was just saying how, oh, I really want that, and that. And he's just like, why don't you go write comedy? Nobody's stopping you. And it's true. Nobody's putting these women down. If they go do something, they actually have to go work for it. That's what they don't want. They don't want to work. And so I don't understand I don't understand this at all, but it also does it demonizes strong men and encourages women in general to go and find weak and corrupt mates, which does really, really damage the institution of marriage if you think about it. And this does come out of a place of academia, and modern day academia, so to speak, and modern day pop culture, where, I see these articles on Huffington Post, for example, that say like, is your boyfriend a true feminist? If he's not, kill him to hit the road, Jack. And I'm just like, does it matter? It's not about, I don't get it. It's like, it's just vitriolic. There's no other way to describe it than vitriolic. But it's strange, because then if you leave a lot of women up to their own devices, they'll go after the bad boy, and the bad boy is not the type of guy you want to marry, in my opinion. I mean, it does tell a lot of women these days that, go after, the artist or whatever without the job, or without the, it sort of doesn't
tell them that there's obviously there's a lot of differences. I mean, it's not a notion, it's not an ideology that pushes virtue at all. It's just loud, very loud. And you can see this in the rise of single motherhood, that a lot of women have been going after these poor mates, and it is a product of cultural Marxism. And this culture does let a lot of women down. It doesn't do a favor to them at all in any way, shape, or form. But, this culture of single motherhood it's truly a product of feminism, in a sense, because it used to be that, well, single mothers were very few and far between, and a lot of them, either divorce was really, when it happened, it was really, really necessary. There was a true reason why, the couple got divorced, but I don't know why. I just see that you can see in society there's such a rise of divorce these days, and it's just like, this is probably a product of, obviously it's a product of the no-fault divorce law. We can see there's definitely a rise in divorce, but also it's probably a product of this liberal ideology, of this women being free, bad behavior type of feminism. It doesn't help. It definitely doesn't help. I do definitely believe that divorce has many factors, but the ideology of feminism and the way it's being pushed on women these days does not help at all. You can see that. And so, yeah, we have this culture of single motherhood that has been introduced via no-fault divorce laws. But see, here's the thing. Let's take, for example, if you were going to marry a man, right? If you're a woman and you're going to marry a man, you definitely want to see, is this guy a good provider? Is he loyal? Does he have virtues? Is he, you got to make sure you judge his character before, I would say if divorce didn't exist, you'd be a lot more careful about the mates you picked before you married them. And I would say that there is an epidemic of women, and there's an epidemic of the culture being dysfunctional and not virtuous. The culture's not helping, but there's this sort of epidemic of just looseness in society. It doesn't make sense to me, but I see this now and again, and you see with MGTOW, this movement of men going their own way, if you don't know what it stands for, but MGTOW is, you have these men who are very damaged because of these terrible stories where we got into relationships and women just used the shit out of them. And of course it does take two, so I would say that maybe they weren't a very good judge of character, but it doesn't matter what gender you are. Whenever you get yourself in a relationship, you have to judge the person's character, especially if you're going to jump into bed with them, and especially if you're going to, make vows with them to spend the rest of your life. So I would say marriage is very important. It's a very important aspect of culture. It's a very important institution. But, this feminism thing and this cultural Marxism hasn't done anything to help it. It's sort of destroying it in a sense. I've been thinking about that a lot because I do believe there's a lot of benefits, and I am an advocate of marriage, but it's crazy. It's just a really crazy thing. So there are vitriolic women who think they're entitled via feminism, because feminism created this culture of entitled women. And these women will find a man and use him, and then leave him, no questions asked, and either milk him for his resources for the next 18 years or demand resources from the state via welfare. I'm not saying this is all women, but there's a lot of women who do this because feminism is an ideology that pushes gynocentrism and self-entitlement on many women's minds. They think, well, I'm a woman, so therefore I'm entitled. And here's the thing. They're raised in that culture. Their environment told them that. So unless you're just
gonna rebel against society. I understand how you can get sucked into that notion. But you see today, as single mothers are being glorified in the media as some sort of independent, great, person. I see, what do you see, these women that are now coming out and saying, Father's Day is bad or fathers are bad, and you see sitcoms with the father being portrayed as this buffoon, and instead of seeing that fathers are very, very important in children's lives to teach them very valuable lessons. They say mothers raise good children and fathers raise good adults, and there's a reason why. That it takes a mother and a father to raise a good child, and I know there's definitely exceptions, but it shouldn't be, women shouldn't be pushing, women shouldn't be behaving in a way which pushes virtue out of their lives, and that's what this ideology does. And so you see these SJWs going out and saying, look, Father's Day is bad, blah blah blah, screw the fathers, blah blah blah. It's like, God, men built society. I think women, you owe them a little bit of thanks, I would say. There is a huge, oh God, there's a huge problem these days. There's a huge problem with women's belief of self-entitlement, but society didn't do anything to help. So yeah, and then you see women who are traditional or marriage-minded being viewed by the rest of the women as oppressed, or being called they're oppressed. So women aren't encouraged to find a decent guy. That's what feminism does. It doesn't encourage women at all to find a man who's decent and virtuous and strong and honorable and all these great things that make people good. Feminism sort of gives women this idea that, hey, just go find a guy who's attractive and that's it. And that's not how society's gone for years and years and years. Attractiveness is not virtue. It's like we can sort of push the narrative and think about sirens back in the Greek and Roman mythology. There's these sirens were basically these very beautiful women. I think there's a Celtic version of the story too, but it's a myth that's as old as time. And these very beautiful women who were just attractive would lure sailors to their death, because Romans did start the whole, they did build boats and everything, and then they did start traveling a lot. But these men would just fall in love with these beautiful women, and then they would just drown them. So you can see how it's this idea that attractiveness is not virtue. Beauty is not virtue. So that's the problem with a lot of women these days, going after these men who are attractive or just attractive on the outside. Of course, men do it too. Well, they'll go after a woman who's attractive and she might be like a siren. But that's just a little tale. So for either genders, if you want to find a mate, I don't think attractiveness is, it's not the answer to lasting relationships. Virtue is, because you can't build a house on fire. You can't build a house on passion. That's what a lot of stories want to tell you, that, hey, pop culture, hey, you're attracted to that guy or that girl or whatever. All right, well, that's all you need. It's not. You need foundation, traditionalism. Hey, these are these things that have kept our ancestors going for years and years and years. Now, I do see another problem is that feminism does ignore the natural biological differences between the genders, and we can start with physical differences. Men are physically stronger than women. I mean, that's just the truth. It's always been the men that go out and fight and the women that stay behind, or the hunter-gatherers, right? That's another idea. That's another piece of history. But I was looking up you guys know of Army Rangers, for example, there's only been, it's one of the highest echelons of the Army, the top of the top, the strongest of the strong, and they have to take a lot of physical tests, very, very tough physical tests, grueling physical tests. And there have only been 75, I believe, women who have graduated from Ranger School. And that's because these are very high standards. Another thing is that it wasn't until 2016 that women were allowed to become Navy SEALs. And guess what? None of them have yet. There's not been one. But there's been this admiral that announced, Bill Moran, announced that the physical standards would not change for men or women. So just because women are now technically permitted if they pass the test, the physical standards have not changed to become a Navy SEAL, and they went in. And so SOCOM reviewed the standards and said, no, we're not going to change the qualifications. And yeah, I mean, here's the funny thing. Many feminists are outraged by this, but not many of them, you know, care that much to become a Navy SEAL. Anyway, so moving on from that, the whole idea of men and women fighting is that, yeah, you know, here's why SOCOM reviewed it, and they said that they weren't going to change the standards. Because, you know, on the front lines, you don't want anybody... This is just practicality-wise. You don't want anyone slowing you down. And if it's only the top of the top men for years that have been becoming Navy SEALs, they shouldn't change the physical standards, because that could be hurting our society. You see, it's gonna be, you know, you could lose a war, you could get attacked by terrorists, and think about that. If you're gonna let women become Navy SEALs. Now, I don't have a problem with women doing it as long as they are as tough as all the men are and they pass the physical standards, but of course that's very, very rare. I would say it's a very, very rare that women would, and you can see that's why there have been no women Navy SEALs yet, because biologically speaking, men are stronger than women. So, you know, it would hurt society if the standards were changed. It would hurt our country. It would hurt, we go as far as to say it would hurt our first world, because, you know, there's some very, very, very grueling standards, and for a good reason, because it's the top echelon, the top of the top, the toughest of the Navy, just like the Rangers. So, yeah, that's just a simple difference. We could go on and we could say women and men have mental differences, psychological differences. So women are more nurturing and men are considered a lot more strong. And I have been watching a lot of Jordan Peterson, and he talks about trait agreeability and how women have a lot more agreeableness over men. Of course, both genders do have agreeability, but women have more and men have less, and that's because women are naturally more nurturing, and women are, they're not very, they don't have high levels of testosterone, I can't say the word, they don't have higher levels, so they're not more easily angered, and they're not more prone to fight. They're more diplomatic because they have to reason a lot more. Because women are naturally geared to bearing children, and so they have to raise children, and they have to have a lot of patience. Agreeability is definitely a feminine trait when you think about it. Women are better at diffusing arguments, and you know, that's just simple psychological differences, and I could probably talk about Jordan Peterson for like hours, but I'll move on. And I want to go on to say that feminism pushes a dangerous narrative on children, and this is very true.
It's like I said, it's sort of like the youth nowadays are being indoctrinated by these ideologies, and it's what I'd like to call a STD, as in socially transmitted disease, because it's taking weak and feeble minds, and of course when you're younger, you're very much more easily influenced. And so, younger growing up in school, and if your parents are feeding you culturally Marxist ideas, that's definitely going to influence you a lot. Society, your parents, people around you, your friends, that is what society is these days. They're not pushing chivalry anymore. You don't see schools teaching manners like they used to. You don't see schools teaching how to find a good spouse. Not that that's always been the thing, but I do know I've watched things from the 40s. I've watched videos they'd show in school from the 40s, and they're all geared to like, how do you dress? How do you talk? How do you do this to the opposite gender? They're not having etiquette. Etiquette's not something that's taught that much anymore. It's only taught if you're a parent who's very traditional, really. And I do think that if you're a parent, your job is to instill very, very good values into your children so that they aren't indoctrinated by their society in a negative way. So then that's definitely you're in charge of your children and in charge of what your children should learn. That should be your number one priority, is teaching your children good values, because that's the future. The children are the future. That's the future society. And the last point I'm just going to bring up to wrap this whole thing up is that feminists ignore the suppression that women in the East face. Yeah, it's absolutely mind-boggling, and to what extent liberals and feminists are pandering to Islam these days. And if anybody knew anything about Islam, is that Sharia law is very dangerous. Sharia law is terrifying, and women, they can't even show their hair. It stones women, it executes women in Islamic countries. And so Sharia law opposes more oppression on women, but Western feminism is somehow apologetic to this idea, and I don't get it at all. I think it doesn't make sense to me in any capability. It doesn't. But you see, nowadays, I saw this Huffington Post article that just confused the hell out of me, and it said, how Islam is the real feminists or something, and I read it, and I was just like, oh yeah, I don't get it. No, I don't. I really don't understand how women who are forced to be like property to their husbands or disposable in Sharia law, how is that feminist? If you want anything, you should be fighting towards these women who are victims of crimes in Islamic countries. That's what feminists should be doing. But whenever you seem to bring up the notion of how destructive Sharia law is in the West, or how destructive Sharia law is to Western feminists rather, they sort of just are like, no, feminism Islamic people are, Muslims are the real feminists. So I'm like, yeah, I don't get that, because they don't let women drive cars. They don't, and of course this is not all Islamic countries, but if, for example, in Saudi Arabia, women have to cover up to here in public. They can't show their hair, and they're supposed to cover up like completely. They can't show like anything. They can't show their hair. They can't show their most of their face, and that's very oppressive. And they're killed, and they're stoned to death. And I do feel very bad. It's terrifying to see that there are other women in the world that are being treated like that. And they didn't have a choice, they were born into that. So I don't understand when Western feminists just are like, no, they're real feminists. I'm like, you just don't, that doesn't make sense. And what else? They have genital mutilation. That's not a right. That's taking somebody's rights.
That's and they want to bring this to the West, so you can't trust that. You can't trust these leftists who want to bring Sharia law to the West. I mean, there's different values. East and the West, we have different values, but I could get into that in a completely other video, but I think I talked about a lot. I mean, God, it's a crazy world we live in these days, so I'm gonna wrap it up, but thank you for watching, and please subscribe, comment, like, share, and yeah, I plan on creating more content, so definitely stick around, and I hope you enjoy this, and please tell me what you think. And yeah, thank you so much for watching.